Hi everyone, welcome back to Storytime Recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the film from 2014, Against the Sun. Without any further, let's get started. In 1942, the United States Navy is prepared to launch a torpedo bomber and fighter jet strike on Japan in retaliation for what happened at Pearl Harbor. On January 16, Pilot Chief Harold Dixon, bombarder Tony Postula, and radio man Gene Aldrich, they are on a patrol mission when they become misdirected and separated from the other planes. Dixon believes they should return to their carrier, but Gene finds they're out of contact and their fuel is running short. Tony drops the bombs in the sea to gain height, but it doesn't really help. Since they still can't get communications to work, Dixon decides to make an emergency landing before they run out of fuel and crash. After the plane safely lands on the water, Dixon emerges wearing his life jacket and pulls the life raft behind him. However, his men are struggling to escape and nearly drown. They only manage to escape at the last second, which prevents them from getting supplies before the plane sinks, while Gene and Dixon both discarded theirs, making it easier for them to float. Tony is stuck with his weapon, but the chief told him to release his weapon so Tony wouldn't sink. After some effort, they succeeded in inflating the raft, although upside down. They did this by tying their life jackets together and tossing them over the raft, creating a handle that enables them to pull and flip the raft over, allowing them to jump on it. Now they only need to wait to be found. The following morning, Dixon and Gene discuss briefly what happened, with each man subtly hinting that the other may have done something wrong. Since such a conversation is fruitless, they decide to take watch and remain vigilant in case a plane passes. As it happens, they are lucky because a plane passes by a few hours later. But even when they remove their shirts and wave them around while shouting, it is unable to see them. Shortly after, the plane leaves and Dixon explains that this was their only chance, because the plane was conducting a box search and wouldn't veer off course and put them in danger of going into enemy territory. According to protocol, they only receive a fleeting glance, but the battle is more important than 3 troops. In order to ensure their survival, Dixon declares the raft belongs to a ship belonging to the United States Navy and he the captain. Tony and Gene will comply with his directives. They identify everything they have in their pockets, but it's not much, mostly a few tools and random items like cables, along with an empty water bag. Dixon has also instructed Gene to keep a knife in his pocket so he won't cut the raft.
No oars.
In order to prevent the raft from being worn off, Dixon also instructs them to remove their shoes and toss them into the sea. However, he refuses to toss his own, which annoys Gene. As the days and hours go by, the troops do their best not to become depressed by their seclusion. They talk about a variety of subjects, and occasionally even sing to pass the time.
Where's that?
Because the sun is so hot during the day, they gradually remove each layer of clothes, which causes their skin to blister. The nights are chilly, and Dixon have nightmares of drowning or the guilt of whatever error may have led them to this predicament in the first place.
That's correct.
The 3 of them don't sleep at the same time, though one of them rarely sleeps. They alternate watching in case they come across an island or a plane, and it's during one of these watches that Dixon chooses to relieve himself in his own shoe and drink his own urine in an attempt to quench his thirst. One morning, when a pleasant breeze pushes the boat forward, Dixon does some calculations to get a rough notion of their destination. They might make it to some islands, but that won't happen for weeks. Therefore, Gene decides he wants to try fishing in order to prevent starvation. They make a hook out of wire and cord and throw it into the sea, but whatever bites is strong. Tony has to help Gene pull back, and when they eventually recover the end of the line, the hook is gone, reminding them that there are some dangerous creatures out there. However, Gene persists. He simply creates a fresh hook and tosses it once more, keeping it in the water for as long as is required. However, the heat eventually irritates him, so he dons a life jacket and jumps off the boat to cool off. Tony wants to follow him, but Dixon advises that they proceed one at a time for safety. He also reminds them that there are sharks in these waters, which makes Gene swim back onto the raft and makes Tony decide not to jump and move on. Over the next few days, the men's tension grows, and Dixon's paranoia causes him to constantly ask his men about what happened on the plane, as though he's looking for someone to hold responsible for their situation. Additionally, Tony is beginning to get thirsty and considers taking a taste of seawater, but Dixon steps in before he can do something foolish. Jean remarks about how many more shoes they might fill with the yellow stuff before being abruptly cut off by Dixon's cries and siege. He has discovered a pencil in his pocket that he had previously forgotten, and he can now draw a chart and monitor their direction. If they wish to reach the island, they must keep the wind in their favor. They create a sea anchor with one of the life jackets, some wire, and some string so they won't be blown in the opposite direction if the wind changes. Their thirst remains the other issue. Jean teaches the other two how to pray and ask God for rain, but the weather doesn't change until later in the evening. The guys laugh with joy and gather as much rainwater as they can on their shirts and the water bag. After a week of drifting, Jean ultimately grows weary of not being able to catch anything with his hook, so he pulls out his knife in spite of Dixon's protests and concerns about the raft. After a few haphazard jabs at the sea, Jean succeeds greatly. He kills a shark, which they take aboard the raft and let it open to consume the small fish it had been eating. They save the shark meat for later use as bait. But this small meal has some major repercussions since they continue to throw the shark blood into the ocean to keep the raft clean, which attracts additional sharks that are now pursuing them. He also assures Jean that he will introduce him to his sister because they would make a fantastic couple. So when one night, a sleepy Jean distractedly puts his hand in the water, it gets bitten. Fortunately, he removes it before he loses it and covers it with Tony's bandana, but the harm has already been done. 2 weeks have gone by since the accident, and although they haven't caught anything like the shark, they do have another rainy day to restock their water bag. However, their hope is starting to fade, and Tony starts to stare at his gun while thinking about some gloomy things. Jean grabs it from him, just as a bird lands on their raft and shoots it, forcing the bird to fall into the ocean. Dixon jumps in right away to retrieve it, but the shark has also become interested in the bird's blood. The guys attempt to fire it, but the gun jams, forcing Dixon to swim as quickly as he can. Fortunately, he returns to the raft before being captured, and they may now eat bird meat, which Dixon believes tastes like chicken. Tony throws the bullets into the sea because the gun is no longer useful, feeling depressed by the possible interpretation of this as a sign of failure. On the morning of day 20, Dixon finds that all three of them have been sleeping. Since there hasn't been any watch, Jean decides it's not worth the effort because there hasn't been any wind for 2 days, and the islands aren't getting any closer.
Who do you think is navigating this?
He shouts out to Dixon for his map, not understanding how he could have determined their position in any case since their plane had been lost and they had no idea where they had started. Additionally, he believes Dixon is to blame for the plane's disappearance since he somehow flew them out of range. After much bickering and shouting, Dixon acknowledges that he had been hoping to see islands a few days prior, which means their path is off. When his memory finally returns, he recalls what occurred on the plane. He had fallen asleep for a few minutes, but it was still enough for them to miss their turn. He apologizes for his error, knowing that he would never be able to make it up. A gloomy mood falls over the raft, so Jean tries to calm things down by picking up the map and explaining that, even though it's not ideal, it's their last chance to get back home. After Tony jokes about making their own wind, Dixon gets the idea to use Jean's knife to cut off the soles of his shoes, which they then use to row. A month after the incident, they eventually get rain again, but this time it's not typical rain. Rather, it's a full-fledged storm complete with lightning, violent waves, and the raft is overturned. When they fall into the water, the men lose the few tools they had, such as their rowing shoes, but the raft is more crucial. They find each other by clinging to it, and with the wind's help, they flip the raft back into place before climbing on it and staying warm by staying close to it until the storm passes. In the morning, when the rain stops, the men are too exhausted to do anything but lie down. They have given up on life, and their conversation becomes gloomy. They talk about what to do with the body if one of them dies, because it might be food. Remember the people at home who think they are dead, and make Dixon cry. Tony and Jean say they wouldn't have sent him to the court-martial for his mistake, and Dixon apologizes again to them for the mistake he made. Since they've come too far to give up now and are fed up with this depressing atmosphere, Tony convinces the others to row with their hands in order to at least try to go down. This wears them out to the point where Dixon drinks seawater, which he said they wouldn't, and Tony nods off so soundly that they briefly think he's dead. Abruptly, Gene sits up when he spots something green in the distance. They have finally located an island, and they are so desperate that they don't care if the enemy takes it. They are crying and the guys start rowing with their hands until they hit the shore waves, which force them to make the final push into the beach. When the three of them safely touch down on the sand, they start to walk shakily toward the two shacks that are nearby. They finally land on February 20th. After spending 34 days at sea and sailing over 1,000 miles in their raft. After they are rescued, Dixon receives the Navy Cross for guiding his crew to safety, but he never again takes part in a combat mission. Tony's disabilities prevent him from pursuing his desired career in the Navy, and when he passes away in 1986, his ashes are dispersed at sea. Gene works as a radio man during the war and gets married to Tony's sister in 1946. Thanks for watching, and remember to turn on your notifications to watch more movie recaps like this one.